August 17th, 1945. 14:30. Hours. Honolulu internment camp, Oahu, territory of Hawaii. The air in the women's barracks was thick enough to drink, smelling of damp canvas, disinfectant, and a new metallic fear. Nurse Takako Abe stood rigid, her knuckles white, as Captain Miller tore through the meager belongings on cot 12. Miller wasn't looking for weapons. He was looking for this. He ripped the false bottom from a small wooden box meant for sewing supplies. Out tumbled a worn, pocket-sized Eigo Nihongo English-Japanese dictionary and a neat stack of rice paper, bound in simple twine. The letters. Riley. Miller's voice was low, dangerous. He stood over the younger corporal, whose face was slick with sweat that had nothing to do with the humid gulch. Miller held up the first sheet, covered in Takako's careful vertical script next to Riley's hesitant English block letters. You've been teaching them. It wasn't a question. The other Japanese nurses, technically POWs, though the brass called them civilian internees, stared, their faces pale masks. Riley's hand instinctively went to the cold steel of the M1901 sidearm on his hip, a useless comfort. "Captain," he started, his voice dry. Miller silenced him, holding up a list of translated words. He tapped one. "Explain this one, Corporal," Miller hissed. "What the hell is komorebi?" 9 months earlier, November 1944, Honolulu Gulch, November 4th, 1944. Honolulu Gulch, Oahu. The truck stopped. The canvas flap was thrown back, assaulting them with light and heat. "Out! Hayaku! Move!" Takako Abe kept her eyes fixed on the cracked heels of the nurse in front of her. Do not look up. Do not show fear. She was Kangofu Abe of the Imperial Japanese Army Nursing Corps. She was not a prisoner. She was a casualty who had failed to die. The gulch was a muddy scar, carved deep into the red volcanic earth. The air was a wet, hot blanket smelling of mold and sugarcane. They were marched past stunned Japanese-American men, internees, not soldiers, who watched them from behind wire, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion. This was Jigokudani, Hell Valley. Then came the processing. They were stripped, their uniforms taken. Takako watched, numb, as a guard with a thick mustache sprayed her body with a cold, chemical fog from a metallic hand pump. The smell of the DDT powder was acrid, clinging to the back of her throat. It was the smell of humiliation. They were lice. They were animals. This, she thought, was the American demon she had been warned about. This was the prelude to the torture. She was handed a rough canvas shift, a bar of soap and a thin towel. A number was stenciled onto the fabric, PW719. She lined up, shivering despite the heat, clutching the soap. A young American guard, barely a man, was checking names against a list. He seemed different from the others. Too tall, too awkward in his khaki uniform, his M1911 sidearm worn with practiced negligence. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking past them. When he reached her, he fumbled the clipboard. He met her eyes by accident. Takako flinched, bracing for a blow or a curse. The guard flushed red. He looked away, stepping aside to let her pass, and muttered something, his Boston accent mangling the word. "Sumimasen." "Excuse me." Takako stopped dead. Her entire body went cold. The word was polite, gentle. He was embarrassed. This clumsy boy, with his clean uniform and leather holster, was not a demon. He was just American. The cognitive dissonance was so profound, so jarring, that her terror momentarily vanished, replaced by a deep, terrifying confusion. She bowed stiffly from the neck and hurried into the barracks, assigned to cot 12, clutching the small, damp book of waka poetry hidden in the waistband of her issued undergarments. 2 weeks later, the routine had become a suffocating, humid drumbeat. Then the shakedown. It came without warning, just after the morning ration. The doors of the barracks burst open. Sergeant Kowalski stood framed in the doorway, sunlight glinting off the Semper Fi tattoo on his forearm. He was a different breed from Riley, a Marine combat veteran from Guadalcanal, rotated back to garrison duty he clearly despised. He carried a stateside-issue M1 carbine, but held it like an extension of his arm. "All right, ladies, on your feet. Inspection." Kowalski's voice was a gravel road. "Riley, Miller, check the cots. I want 'em stripped." Takako's blood ran cold. The book. It was under the thin, lumpy mattress of cot 12. She stood at attention as Corporal Riley approached, his face set in a mask of professional detachment. He worked methodically, unlike Kowalski, who ripped through the neighboring cot's meager belongings. Riley lifted the mattress. The book lay exposed. A small, dark blue rectangle, its rice paper pages swollen and warped by the humidity. Kowalski saw it instantly. "What's that?" "Contraband. Toss it in the burn pile, Riley." Takako stopped breathing. That book was her father's last gift. It was the only part of herself that had not been stripped away, deloused, and stenciled with a number. Riley picked it up. He didn't toss it. He weighed it in his hand. He was a literature student from Boston. He knew the look of a book, even in a language he couldn't read. He saw the vertical kanji, the delicate brush strokes. "Contraband," Riley said, his voice flat. He looked past Takako toward Kowalski. "I'll log it at the guardhouse. Evidence." He slid the small, damp volume into the large cargo pocket of his fatigue trousers. Kowalski grunted, unconvinced, but too bored to argue over a piece of paper. "Whatever. Finish the line." Takako watched him walk away. She felt dizzy, sick with failure. She had lost it. Her final link to home, to honor, was gone. It was not in the burn pile, but it was in the hands of the enemy, logged as evidence. She had failed to protect the last beautiful thing she owned. She felt a profound, bottomless shame, sharper than the DDT or the canvas shift. For 3 days, Takako existed in a state of suspended dread. The book was gone. On the 4th night, she was on late duty in the camp infirmary, a long wooden hut that smelled of carbolic acid and mildew. She was cleaning instruments, her hands moving with mechanical precision. The door creaked. Corporal Riley entered, his face shadowed by his M1 helmet liner. He carried a small wooden crate. Takako froze, her back to him. "Nurse Abe," he said, his voice quiet. He placed the crate on the supply table. "Medical stores, aspirin, quinine." She did not turn. She could hear him shifting his weight, the creak of his leather web gear. The silence stretched, thick and humid, broken only by the chirping of insects in the gulch. He should leave. His presence here, alone with her, was a breach. Also, he stammered. He reached into the same cargo pocket. This was logged, but the log was damaged. Water. He slid something across the wooden table. It was her book. Takako turned slowly. The book sat next to a tin of aspirin, looking impossibly small and frail under the single bare bulb. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was returning it. He was taking an immense risk, fabricating a story about a damaged log, all for this. She looked up at him. His face was earnest, his eyes searching hers, not with malice or authority, but with curiosity. He pointed to the cover, his finger hovering just above the embossed title. "Poem?" he whispered. He tried the word he had looked up. "Uta?" He had not destroyed it. He had recognized it. He had tried to understand it. The confusion she felt on that first day returned, but this time it was not fear. It was a profound, seismic shock. This American, this demon, had just performed an act of inexplicable, dangerous decency. Takako Abe, PW 71 did the only thing her body remembered. She straightened her back, placed her hands flat on her thighs, and executed a deep, formal bow. Not the bow of a prisoner to a guard, but the bow of one human acknowledging another. When she rose, he was gone. The only sound was the generator and the buzzing insects. Left on the table, beside her book, was a single foil-wrapped stick of Wrigley's chewing gum. The chewing gum was a revelation. It was sweet, artificial, and utterly American. Takako chewed it in secret, long after the flavor was gone, a small act of defiance. The next day, she took a risk. On the underside of the empty aspirin tin, meant to be returned to the stores, she drew a single, elegant kanji, ganjie, kansha, gratitude. She left the tin on the infirmary desk for the morning supply run. When Riley came by, he saw the tin, picked it up, and paused. He glanced at the character, his brow furrowed. He pocketed it and left, leaving the required supplies. The channel was open, but the Waka book and the single word were not enough. Communication was clumsy, dangerous, like trying to build a house with only a hammer. A week later, Riley was on infirmary duty again. This time his movements were stiff, unnatural. He seemed agitated, his eyes constantly checking the door. He set down the box of bandages, his hand shaking slightly. Need to check the inventory sheet. In the back room, he muttered, mostly to himself, and disappeared. Takako knew this was a break in routine. He never went into the back room. She heard him rustling around. Then the main door opened and closed. He was gone. It felt wrong. She waited a full minute before moving to the supply table. Everything seemed normal. Bandages, iodine, sutures. But then she saw it. Tucked just behind the leg of a heavy metal cabinet, half hidden in the shadows, was a small olive drab book. It was not hers. She snatched it. Her hands were trembling. It was a U.S. Army issue pocket dictionary. English-Japanese, Japanese-English. This was not a mistake. This was not a misplaced item. This was a conscious, calculated, and deeply illegal gift. He had not just returned her property. He was now actively arming her with words. Takako slipped the book into the waistband of her canvas shift, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm. This was no longer a game of curiosity. This was conspiracy. She felt a dangerous, unfamiliar thrill, the power to ask, the power to understand. That night, by the light of a sliver of moon through the barracks window, she found the word picnic and began to draft her first real question on a stolen sliver of rice paper. Her question about picnic, a word she had found in the dictionary associated with leisure and food, was answered not with a note, but with an object. It was Jack's most audacious risk yet. He left it under a stack of clean linens in the infirmary, a copy of Life magazine, dated October 1944. It was heavy, slick, and smelled of chemical ink and a world she could not comprehend. That night, in the darkest corner of the barracks, Takako and two other nurses she trusted huddled around it. They shielded the pages with a blanket. The war photos were familiar. Images of American GIs, tanks, and bombers. They had seen similar images in their own propaganda, only reversed. This did not shock them. What shocked them were the advertisements. They stared, mesmerized, at a full-page color photograph of a smiling American woman in a pristine kitchen, opening a gleaming white refrigerator. The refrigerator was full. It overflowed with milk bottles, eggs, butter, and a joint of beef. In another advertisement, a family laughed in a polished new Ford automobile, seemingly driving to nowhere in particular. They turned the pages in silence. Advertisements for Campbell's soup, for Chesterfield cigarettes, for lipstick. One of the nurses, Emmy whispered, "They're women. They paint their faces like that. In wartime?" Takako said nothing. She was thinking of Tokyo. She was thinking of the Tonarigumi. neighborhood associations, the rations of watery soup and rice, the frantic scrap metal drives. The luxury is our enemy posters. Her government had told her that America was a nation of decadent barbarians, but also that they were desperate, their resources stretched thin by the righteous Japanese spirit. The magazine in her hands told a different story. It depicted a nation not of demons, but of absurd, smiling, wasteful abundance. The propaganda was not just a lie, it was a fragile fantasy. This magazine, with its smiling women and mountains of food, was a more potent weapon than any M1 rifle. It suggested, in glossy color, that the war was already lost. The Life magazine had changed something. The notes they exchanged, hidden in the aspirin tin, became more frequent. Takako's English improved at a startling rate. She asked about the advertisements, about the smiling women, about the word democracy. Jack, emboldened by his success, felt a growing sense of purpose. He wasn't just a guard. He was an educator, a cultural bridge. He decided to share something of his own, his personal, dog-eared copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The infirmary was too risky. Kowalski had been adding extra spot checks to the duty roster. Jack arranged a new dead drop, a hollowed-out fence post behind the camp laundry where Takako worked on Tuesdays. He made the drop during his afternoon patrol, slipping the book into the hollow. He felt a thrill of righteousness. He was sharing Whitman, the voice of American freedom. He didn't see Sergeant Kowalski, posted on the high ground near the motor pool, watching the entire compound through a pair of M3 binoculars. Kowalski didn't see the book, but he saw Corporal Riley divert from his patrol route. He saw him linger by the laundry fence, and 5 minutes later, he saw Nurse Abe, PW 7199, retrieve a small package from that exact spot. Jack felt good until he returned to the guardhouse. Kowalski was waiting for him, cleaning the bolt of his M1 carbine with excessive, angry precision. The smell of gun oil hung heavy in the small room. Kowalski didn't look up. "Getting off your route, Riley?" Jack froze, his hand on the door. "Just checking the fence line, Sergeant." The fence line. Kowalski snapped the bolt back into place with a metallic clack that made Jack jump. He finally looked up, his eyes flat and cold. "You were checking the laundry fence line, where the merchandise works." He stood up, his shadow falling over Jack. "You're a college boy, aren't you, Riley? Think you're smarter than us, grunts? Think you're different?" He jabbed a thick finger into Jack's chest. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a goddamn Jap lover putting this whole camp at risk." Jack's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a warning. It was an accusation. "Stay away from her," Kowalski hissed, his voice dropping to a whisper more dangerous than a shout. "I see you go near that fence again. I won't just report you. I'll handle it myself." The game was over. This was real. Jack felt a cold, primal fear. He was no longer just curious. He was now actively and ineptly trying to protect someone from a man who had seen combat, a man who saw only the enemy. Jack vanished. He was still on patrol, a distant khaki figure, but he no longer checked the laundry fence. The infirmary drop stopped. The aspirin tin remained empty. Takako understood. He was afraid. His fear confirmed the danger she too was in. But the silence was unbearable. The connection, having cracked open her indoctrinated world, was now her only lifeline. She clung to the dictionary and the Whitman book, studying them in secret with a new, desperate hunger. She practiced English words under her breath, her mind worlds away. She did not notice Nurse Sato watching her. Sato was the senior nurse, a woman in her 40s whose husband and sons were all serving the emperor. She embodied the rigid code Takako had been raised on. She saw Takako's detachment not as trauma, but as arrogance. She saw her practicing English not as survival, but as betrayal. The confrontation happened in the mess hall over the midday meal of watery taro stew. The room was thick with humidity and the sullen silence of defeated women. Sato stood up and walked to Takako's bench. "You have been hoarding," Sato said, her voice loud enough for the room to hear. Takako looked up, confused. "Sato-san? You hoard supplies from the Americans. You smile at the guards. You dishonor us. I do not." "I have seen you," Sato hissed, her face contorted with a righteous fury. "You read their books. You speak their filth." She pointed a trembling finger at Takako. "You forget who you are. You have let them poison you." Before Takako could react, Sato's hand cracked across her face. The sound was sharp, shocking in the quiet room. "Inu!" Sato spat the word. "Dog. Traitor." Takako's ears rang. The sting on her cheek was nothing compared to the ice that flooded her veins. She looked around. The other nurses, women she had trained with, women she had been captured with, all lowered their eyes. They shuffled away from her bench. They would not meet her gaze. She had been branded, shamed. In doing what she felt she must to survive, she had confirmed her status as an outcast. She was no longer just a prisoner of the Americans. She was now a traitor to the Japanese. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. That night, she did not open the dictionary. Jack saw the slap. He was too far away, patrolling the ridge, but he saw the motion. He saw Kowalski smirk, and in the days that followed, he saw Takako shrink. She walked with her eyes on the ground. She ate alone. The defiant spark he had seen was gone, extinguished. His fear of Kowalski was eclipsed by a sharp, protective anger. He had done this. His clumsy attempts at connection had put her in this position, caught between two worlds. He had to know if she was safe. He waited a week, until Kowalski was on a 3-day leave in Honolulu. Jack signed himself up for the medical supply run, his stomach tight. He found Takako in the infirmary, stocking bandages. She looked thin, exhausted, and did not look up when he entered. He put the crate down, his hands sweating. He had rehearsed this. He couldn't speak. Instead, he dropped a small, folded note into an empty suture tin. It was a single sentence, written in his clumsy, blocky English. "Are you safe?" He left without a word. For 2 days, the tin sat on the return shelf, untouched. Jack felt sick. Maybe he had broken her. Maybe Sato was right. On the 3rd day, the tin was back in the outgoing pile. He took it to the supply shed, his fingers trembling. Inside, folded with perfect precision, was a sheet of rice paper. He expected an answer. "Yes." "No." "Leave me alone." It was not an answer. It was a definition. Weeks ago, in one of his notes, he had pointed to the Waka book and asked about the beauty of the language, how one word could mean so much. Now, she answered that question. She had written a single word, mu-lu-re-ri. Beside it, in careful, newly confident English, she explained, "Komorebi. It is the sunlight, not the sun. It is the light between the leaves of a tree. The dappled light, the dancing light on the ground." Jack stared at the paper. She had not told him she was safe. She had not acknowledged the slap or her isolation. She had bypassed the ugly, immediate present and answered a question about beauty. It was an act of profound, courageous trust. The exchange was no longer about magazines or dictionaries. It was about sharing a concept that had no equivalent in his own language. It was the most human and the most dangerous letter yet. August 15th, 1945. The rumors had been circulating for days, ever since the guards had gathered around the radio, their hushed tones replaced by shouts. But the prisoners knew nothing until midday, when the camp fell into an unnatural silence. A new loudspeaker, mounted on a pole near the mess hall, crackled to life. All prisoners, assemble in the main yard. All prisoners. Takako stood with the other women, her skin prickling with dread. Nurse Sato stood beside her, rigid, her face a mask of hateful denial. The American guards, including Riley, lined the perimeter, their rifles held loosely. They looked as confused as the prisoners. The loudspeaker hissed with static. Then a voice. It was not the voice of an American officer. It was high-pitched, formal, and spoke in an archaic, courtly Japanese that Takako could barely comprehend. It was the voice of the emperor. A collective gasp swept through the yard. It was the first time any of them had heard his voice. He was not a god. He was a man speaking through static. He spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, of enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. Takako did not need to understand the courtly phrases. The meaning was absolute. The women around her began to collapse. Not in relief, but in a profound guttural agony. They fell to their knees, clawing at the red dirt, wailing. This was not the sound of surrender. It was the sound of a world ending. Their nation, their families, their identity, their entire purpose for living and dying, all of it vaporized. Takako remained standing, numb. The shame of her capture felt meaningless, dwarfed by this colossal, collective shame. They had lost. From the tower, Jack Riley watched, horrified. He had expected cheers, relief. This was not victory. This was a mass psychological breakdown. Nurse Sato, who'd been standing stone still, suddenly let out a strangled cry. She lunged for the fence, grabbing a loose piece of barbed wire and dragging it fiercely across her own throat. "Tenno Heika Banzai!" she screamed as two guards tackled her, blood pouring onto the dust. In the ensuing chaos, Sergeant Kowalski, his breath thick with whiskey from an early VJ Day celebration, found Captain Miller. "Sir," he slurred, his face dark with rage. "The camp's coming apart. Riley's girl just tried to kill herself. I told you he was a risk. We need to lock this down. We need to shake them all down now." Captain Miller, his face grim and exhausted by Sato's suicide attempt, relented. "Fine, Kowalski. Lock it down. Search the barracks. Find any contraband that might be inflaming this." It was the permission Kowalski needed. He took 3 guards, not including Riley, who was detained writing an incident report on Sato. "Tear it apart," Kowalski roared, kicking open the door to the women's barracks. The nurses, already traumatized by the broadcast, huddled together as the men stormed in. This was not an inspection. It was a violation. Kowalski moved with vicious purpose. He ignored the other cots, making a straight line for cot 12. Takako stood frozen, watching him. He was not looking for weapons. He was looking for this. He ripped her thin mattress off the frame. He threw her spare shift to the floor. He kicked her small wooden sewing box. "Where is it, Inu?" he snarled at Takako. He saw a loose floorboard beneath the cot, a space Takako had found to hide the Whitman book and her letters. He jammed his K-bar knife into the crack and pried it open. There it was, the olive drab dictionary, the copy of Leaves of Grass, and the neat stack of rice paper bound in twine. "Gotcha," he breathed. He seized the bundle and stalked into the center of the room. "Captain Miller," he bellowed toward the door, "found the problem." He held them up for all to see. Then, with a look of pure malice at Takako, he threw the letters to the floor, scattering the delicate kanji across the dusty planks. "Riley!" Jack burst into the barracks, having heard the commotion. He saw the scattered pages. He saw Kowalski standing over Takako, his face flushed with victory. Something in Jack snapped. All the fear, the hesitation, the months of watching were gone. "That's enough, Sergeant," Jack shouted, and shoved Kowalski hard. Kowalski stumbled back, his hand instinctively flying to the .45 on his hip. The other guards raised their rifles. "Riley, Abe." Captain Miller stood in the doorway, his face pale with fury. He looked at the two guards facing off, at the stunned Japanese nurse, and at the scattered letters, the proof, on the floor. "My office, now." Captain Miller's office was unnaturally clean. The only sound was the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of a large ceiling fan stirring the humid air. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Takako and Jack stood at attention before his desk. Sergeant Kowalski stood in the corner, a satisfied, venomous presence. On the desk, laid out like evidence in a murder trial, were the dictionary, the Whitman book, and the scattered rice paper letters. Miller rubbed the bridge of his nose, his exhaustion warring with his duty. "Riley," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "You know Article 96, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Assaulting a superior NCO is just the start. Fraternization with a prisoner in wartime." "Sir," Jack said, his voice hoarse, "I did not assault him. I pushed him. He was disrespecting the prisoners." "Disrespecting?" Kowalski barked from the corner. "I found contraband. Looks like conspiracy to me, Captain." Miller silenced him with a raised hand. He picked up one of the letters, a list of translated words. He stared at it, his face a mask of frustration. This was the moment from 9 months ago, now recontextualized. "I don't get it, Corporal," Miller hissed. He held up the sheet. "You've been teaching them." He tapped one of the words Takako had defined. "Explain this one, Corporal. What the hell is komarebi?" Jack looked at the word. He saw the infirmary. He saw the terror in Takako's eyes. He saw the light through the leaves of the banyan trees in the gulch. He looked at Miller, exhausted, all protocol gone. "It's the light, sir." "The what?" "It's the light," Jack repeated, his voice finding its strength. "The light that filters through the leaves. There's no English word for it." Miller stared at him, baffled. He looked from the earnest, doomed corporal to the Japanese nurse, who had been standing as still as a statue. Then Takako spoke. Her voice was quiet, but her English was clear, practiced. "He is not my enemy, Captain." Miller, Kowalski, and Jack all looked at her, stunned. "He did not consort. He is my teacher." She looked Miller directly in the eye, her shame replaced by a cold, hard dignity. "I asked." He answered, "It is not a conspiracy. It is a dictionary." The room fell silent, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the fan. Miller looked at the letters, at the book, and at the two young people before him. He saw the truth, and it was infinitely more complicated and somehow less dangerous than what Kowalski was selling. Captain Miller sighed, the sound lost under the fan's ticking. The war was over. There was no conspiracy. There was only a broken corporal, a furious sergeant, and a very tired Japanese nurse. The judgment was swift and bureaucratic. Corporal Riley was summarily court-martialed for conduct prejudicial to good order and striking an NCO. He was demoted to private, fined 2/3 of his pay for 6 months, and reassigned to sanitation duty. Sergeant Kowalski was transferred. The letters were filed away as evidence in a sealed box, labeled PW 719 Contraband. Nurse Takako Abe was placed in a separate holding area to await repatriation. Their war, the small, secret war of words, was over. January 1946, Honolulu Harbor. The docks were chaotic, smelling of salt, diesel fumes, and wet metal. A gray transport ship, the General M.L. Hersey, waited to take the last of the Japanese internees and POWs home. Private Jack Riley stood in the rain, assigned to the perimeter guard. His job simply to be a body in a uniform. He was no longer part of the camp command. He was just another soldier waiting to go home. He watched the long, anonymous line of Japanese nationals shuffling up the gangplank, processed by Red Cross workers. He searched the crowd for her. He almost missed her. She was just another woman in a donated wool coat, her face thin, her hair cut short. She paused at the top of the gangplank, turning for one last look at the island that had been her prison. Their eyes met across the expanse of wet asphalt. He saw her. She saw him, a private standing in the rain. He raised his hand, a small, hesitant gesture. Takako Abe, no longer PW 719, straightened her back. In the midst of the noise, the shouting, and the diesel smoke, she placed her hands flat on her thighs and executed a single, formal, perfect bow. The same bow she had given him in the infirmary. A bow of acknowledgement. Then she turned and disappeared into the gray hull of the ship. Spring 1951, Boston, Massachusetts. Professor Jack Riley, his tweed jacket smelling of pipe tobacco, collected his mail from the university post office. Among the academic journals and bills was a single postcard. The image was of Hiroshima. It was not the image of ashes he knew from the newsreels. It was a city rebuilding. There were new buildings, bicycles, and even a few fledgling trees. He turned it over. There was no return address, no signature, just 3 lines of text. The postmark was blurred, but the handwriting was immaculate, the English perfect. It said, "Professor Riley, the light is returning here. Sunlight.